What's going on? What's going on, everybody? This is Brent0331. Appreciate everybody tuning in. So we got a live stream 26 tonight, fighting a peer and near peer enemy, and we got a few people on the panel tonight. Not as many as we usually have, but figured it'd still be a lively discussion. So go around the horn, introducing everybody. Got Chad. Chad's a good buddy of mine. Served together in Bravo 123, 2011, 2012 time frame in Afghanistan. Chad is also a veteran of Operation Iraqi Freedom 1 and 2, initial invasion, and then he fought in the Battle of Fallujah. And just a wealth of knowledge. He's studying for his military doctorate's degree, and just always brings a very intellectual approach to our conversation. So thanks for coming on tonight, brother. Next in the house, we got Les from Pegasus Tests. Pegasus Tests is his YouTube handle, so make sure you guys go ahead and check out his channel. Again, wealth of knowledge. Les served in the United States Marine Corps in the early 90s. He's a veteran of Desert Storm. He has his own logistics company, so he knows how to move shit from point A to point B. He also has his own tactical training company called Polaris Tactical and Simulations Division. Make sure you guys check it out. He's also a Black Hat instructor at the One Shepherd Leadership Institute. Les, always appreciate you coming on, man.
Great to be here, brother.
And our last panelist tonight is my good buddy Bruce at Camp Armament. That is his YouTube channel. That's also his Instagram name. Make sure you guys check him out. No stranger to my YouTube channel. He's my right-hand man. He's helped me out on many, many videos. It always brings an excellent perspective. Bruce is our token civilian on the panel, so he brings that dynamic to our discussions. He's a former aircraft mechanic. He's an armorer. And he's been to a lot of tactical training-oriented schools. So, Bruce, thanks for coming on tonight. All right, guys, and that is our panel tonight. The four of us going to be talking about fighting a peer and near-peer enemy. And the reason this is coming up, because obviously there's a big fight going on in Ukraine. You have the Russians conducting an invasion of Ukraine. And what we're seeing is the Ukrainians are putting up a much stronger resistance and defense than anybody ever anticipated. Now, I didn't want this whole stream to be dedicated just to the Ukrainian fight, but more of a broader conversation, because in the U.S. military, we've been conditioned for the last 2 decades in fighting a war against a obviously inferior force, people that did not have the same capabilities as us. They did not have the air. They did not have the armored vehicles. And the enhanced weapon systems and the night fighting capabilities that we had. And we got, to be quite frank, we got conditioned to fighting that battle. So there's no question in my mind that the next fight is going to be against a peer or near peer threat. And I think the fighting that's going on in Ukraine right now should be a wake-up call for a lot of folks, because what we're seeing there is just straight up combined arms. You got every aspect of military warfare taking place, from cyber all the way to fighting in the air with the use of your conventional aircraft, drones, UAVs, and on the ground you have infantry, armored vehicles, anti-tank weapons, artillery, the whole gamut. So that is no question, guys. The next wars in the future, assuming they don't go nuclear, are going to be some pretty intense peer, near-peer battles. So with that being said, guys, let's kick it around the room, and let's kick it over to Les, like always. You take it.
Gotta love tradition. So the fight in Ukraine is definitely a near-peer fight, but it does show something interesting. The equipment is literally the same on each side. Their tanks are almost the same. Their BIMPs are the same. Their air defense systems are the same. Their aircraft are the same. So what's different? It's coming down to the individual soldier. Clearly, since the 2014 invasion, the Ukrainians have trained. They have gone out. They have gotten better. They have improved their forces. Maybe not materially, but in their field craft and their soldiering, they have definitely improved what they were in 2014. The Russians, on the other hand, seem to be ill-trained, unprepared. If you believe the propaganda out there, some of them think they're there to defeat Nazis that have taken over the Ukraine. Their logistical network was not in place. I mean, you can't deny that. You can spin it whatever way you want, but the logistics just are not there with what's available on the open source. So when it comes to a near peer fight, I think one of the big lessons immediately learned here is you must bring your A game. Uh, the older adage, you fight with the army that you have, not the one you want. Well, in the modern day, apparently, when you decide to go to war, you better be as trained as you can be.
Yeah, those are fantastic points. You kind of stole my thunder a little bit, but I'll proceed with it anyway. Let's define what peer and near peer is. Peers are equal. Near peers, there's a slight imbalance. But Brent, you kind of mentioned this in your opening. I think it also matters who's on offense and who's on defense. Offensive operations are always more costly in terms of logistics and manpower than defensive operations. Les, you mentioned 2014, the Ukraine invasion. Russia was far ahead of Ukraine. They basically used special forces to go in and secure objectives. They successfully blockaded Sevastopol, maintained air superiority. They took Belbek Air Base fairly quickly, blockaded all of Ukrainian forces, surrounded Ukrainian bases. Russia was superior, and now it's not looking so much. And I think partly part of that is because they're on the offensive. So.
All right. Well, I'll just add to that on top of what Pegasus was talking about. And I'll probably take Brent's thunder because he is the camo master. But we can look at two peers that basically came from the same supply line, at least up until Ukraine was separated from the Soviet Union. They have a lot of those block weapons. They still haven't completely retrofitted to really anything Western. And when the first conflict broke out, everything that was going on with the Russian separatists east of the Donbass area, I think one of the things that the Ukrainians realized pretty quickly was that it was hard to tell forces apart. Short of having radio contact, simply putting eyes on, it was difficult to tell them apart. So what you start to see is you start to see a few things happening. One, the pro-Russian and Russian forces today started marking their vehicles with white lines or other types of white markings, and there's multiple ones being used in the invasion today to separate them from the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians went a step further. Most of their armor is painted in a camouflage pattern now. They left them the green and they put some tan over that just to break up the outline of that vehicle, but also to separate it and make an easy visual for soldiers to see so they don't fire an RPG at the wrong vehicle. And thirdly, we're seeing a difference in camouflage patterns. The Ukrainians pretty quickly started picking up on multicam when it became available and started becoming popular. They are fairly well outfitted with multicam for the most part now. And it looks like most of the Russian forces that are coming in that I've seen so far are wearing digital flora. And those are two patterns that are pretty easily distinguishable from afar. The digital floor appears darker and more green, and the multicam lighter and more tan. So those are a few differences to where you've got similar forces speaking similar languages with similar equipment, but they're trying to separate one another back and from preventing any friendly fire casualties.
Hey, you're killing it tonight, Fisher. So if you guys don't know, Zane, he's a buddy of mine, served with me in OIF 1 and 2, Bravo 1-4. And I did an interview with Warfighter. So anyway, you guys can go check that out if you're interested in that. One thing I want to piggyback off what Bruce just said. So yeah, I've seen the Ukrainians wear some multicam. They also have like their own variant of looks like a dyed UCP, but a lot more effective. And you also notice, and this is even untrue on the Russian side, like they're going down, they were reverting to wearing colored armbands, just whether that's tape, duct tape, or something like that, just something that's more identifiable. If that doesn't speak to the fog of war and the how hard it is to distinguish friend from foe, I mean, go take part in a one shepherd field training exercise, and you guys will see you doing force on force. Like even with the difference between woodland and OD, sometimes it's still difficult to tell who the enemy is, even though you're wearing two completely different uniforms. So that's an interesting aspect of this modern, near peer battle that we're seeing taking place, and one of their pretty primitive solutions that they came up with for friendly identification.
Yeah, isn't that interesting that when everything's the same, everybody reverts back to the basics? For all the that you're hearing about all the NLAWs and javelins that have been sent there, most of the image I'm seeing with anti-tank weapons is either their version of a M72 Law, I think they call it the RPG-18, and RPG-7s. In the video, the majority of the video out there, that seems to be the predominant anti-armor weapon. Also, despite the Ukraine armed forces, if you look at their order of the battle, they supposedly have Tavors, a version of the M4 and 7.62 by 39. Almost predominantly across the board, though, the weapons you're seeing, AK-74s. The weapons being equal, like I said earlier, comes just down to training. And for being on the Ukraine border and supposedly being in major exercises, which was probably the purpose of the exercise to train up for the invasion, didn't seem to go well because the Russians just are not performing at a level that they should be performing at. I mean, you can give a lot of credit to the Ukrainians, and it's due to them, but the Russians do not seem to have their act together on this. Here we are on day 11. They don't have air superiority. Here we are on day 11. They still haven't got Kiev surrounded. Here we are in day 11. Mariupol hasn't fallen. And when you look at a map, how that didn't fall on day one makes no sense whatsoever.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about the Russian army. And I think there's a reason for that. I think since the collapse of the Soviet Union, there's been a lot of attempts by the Russian military to westernize. After Gulf Storm, they became. I've read a lot of literature about Russian field manuals, current manuals, and stuff like that. And it seems like, at least from our perspective, once the Gulf Storm was over, they became obsessed with that campaign, and they tried to learn a lot from it. They learned our how we employed mechanized forces, the incorporation of new technologies like GPS, et cetera, et cetera. And since then, they've been trying to vamp their military up to resemble kind of a Western military. They've got new looks, they've got new equipment, stuff like that. So I think that's kind of one reason that they haven't really figured things out yet.
Yeah, but another thing that's interesting is one of the things that happened to us in Desert Shield, Desert Storm was there was nothing to do in the desert. So we trained. And that sword was about as sharp as it could ever be when the ground war kicked off. Apparently, the Russians did not use their training time in the run up to this invasion effectively.
So I think
you're probably right.
Yeah, and again, I don't want to get too focused on Ukraine. I mean, it's a big example here, but you go back to OIF 1, and like Chad and I, when we were in the desert preparing for the invasion of Iraq, like we knew we were going into Iraq, right? And we knew what our senior leaders knew what our objectives were going to be. So we were training for those, whether that was breaching obstacles, clearing minefields, trench clearing. Like we knew, we had an idea of what we were going to do when the invasion kicked off. I suspect, with this Russian-Ukrainian example, their guys, for OPSEC reasons, thought they were just massing on the border for a big training exercise, and they just did a bunch of live fire ranges, right? They weren't doing, they weren't sitting in dark rooms with all their senior leaders and all their NCOs saying, okay, when this kicks off, we're going to be taking, this village here, and this is what we're going to be doing. So our training is going to mirror these objectives and everything else. I don't think they were doing that whatsoever.
That seems to be the story, Brent, and that's another good example, difference in peer near peer, right? We've got similar peoples with similar backgrounds to a point, but you've got one military that's absolutely preparing for a fight and has been preparing for years, that being the smaller, less equipped military, and another military that shows up on a border. They're amassed fairly quickly. They sit around, it seems to be twiddling their thumbs for a month. And they're being told the whole time that it was a training, it was going to be a training exercise. And all of a sudden they find themselves rolling into a live fire situation where bullets are going both ways, and they really aren't mentally prepared for what's to come. And maybe that's a lesson that can be learned. If you're going to get into a battle, whether you're an individual or a large military, being mentally prepared is very important. It's something that I think those of us that train have said all along, but we're seeing it on a large scale now from two not that dissimilar groups.
I want to comment on this guy's comment. He says, I've yet to see the single video of a modern Russian main battle tank in combat, let alone knocked out. So I believe like the Russians have the Armada tank. And my question is like, where are those things? Like we've seen those in like the Red Square parades and stuff, but they haven't brought those up. So it's like, did they know? I don't see, again, to the point.
I don't think there's that many of them.
Yeah,
honestly.
I don't think there's that many of them. And at this point, I don't know if, they didn't expect this. I don't think they did not expect this to go this way. And therefore they did not bring their starting lineup. That's why there's probably a lot of conscripts up there.
They may have just had bad intel. The intel being that they believe the Ukrainians would welcome them with open arms and flowers in their rifles, and that hasn't materialized. If that's the case, that's going to be a huge military blunder. Something else to think about whenever you're talking about these foreign militaries, or any military for that matter, they always put their brightest, shiniest stuff out on parade, right? But the question is, do they really have the capability to put a lot of their top tech out and afford to lose some of it or have some of it get captured? I always remember probably 15, 20 years ago, when I was watching a show and they said, do you know who logs the most hours on the Hind gunship? It's the United States. We had like 3 of them over in Louisiana at a military base, and we were flying them nonstop as OPFOR training for our airmen and our crewmen. And we were logging more hours than even Russia was logging on their own helicopter gunship. And that kind of puts things into perspective as to the economy that they've got there, the capabilities that they have, not what's on paper, but what they can really put forward. And I'm going to tell you, like I think most of you in chat have already mentioned, been fairly disappointed with Russia's performance up until this point. I stand with the Ukrainians, don't get me wrong, but I expected this to be a wipeout when they committed to it. And the fact that we haven't seen that, and it doesn't seem like we're seeing cutting edge technology from Russia being fielded in this combat scenario either. I'm not sure why, but I'm sure there's a reason why, and I'm sure that we'll find out about it at some point. At this point, we can just surmise. But I'll tell you this, there's nobody I'd rather ask about it than the guy above me, Chad Cada.
Well, I think Russia came prepared to fight a limited war. I don't think they brought enough toys with them to occupy the entire country of Ukraine. How many battle groups did they have? Anybody that they initially invaded?
I heard about 100, but I think that term gets misused and abused so much that it's almost meaningless.
Does anybody know exactly how many troops they crossed with? I don't have it.
I think around 130,000.
Yeah, that's definitely not enough to occupy a country at all. So their objectives are obviously limited just by the sheer lack of manpower already there. They didn't come over with huge armadas of tanks and mechanized infantry. They came with a lot of troops. They're definitely not shelling the crap out of cities like they did in Grozny back in Chechnya. I think they're starting to get a little more aggressive now that they see their efforts are not put up, but they did not come to fight a full on-scale war. But now you've got Ukraine, and this is kind of goes into the peer near peer. I mean, Ukraine is preparing for total war. They got civilians involved in the war. I mean, they're preparing the population for military operations now and post-occupation. So I don't think Russia came fully prepared to fight a full-on war.
I think you're right there.
Doc brought up a great point on the last time we talked about Ukraine and like our numbers going into Iraq. Just U.S. alone. Not to mention like allies far exceeded what the Russians went into Ukraine with. But, and again, so I think Bruce said this, but you have essentially what's going on there is a near peer threat, right? Ukraine versus Russia could be considered near peer because of the numbers difference. But in terms of capabilities, it's almost exactly the same. And the Ukrainians have the home field advantage, and that speaks, volumes. So and that's what we're seeing. You're seeing like that's why the Russians haven't established air superiority because the Ukrainians have an air defense and they still have an air force. So I mean, if the United States is not watching this with a microscope right now, like we're failing drastically because I mean, can you imagine, Chad? Can you imagine us going into Iraq in 2003 and still seeing freaking Iraqi MiGs flying around and our own helicopters getting shot down by Iraqi surface to air missiles and constantly getting shelled and convoys ambushed left and right? Like it would have just been a whole different ballgame.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting comparison there because during Desert Storm, if an Iraqi MiG went into the sky, only one or two things happened to it. One, it flew to Iran, and we were like happy to let it go because it took it off the battlefield, or it ended up in the desert as twisted metal. It never landed again, regardless.
So I don't know if these numbers are accurate, but this guy says 450,000-ish. I mean, that's well above what the Russians went into Ukraine with.
And Ukraine is I don't know how big it is landmass, but I think it's much bigger than Iraq is as far as landmass and population.
It's got to be much more populated. And, there was the difference here, and I think you guys will agree, is that when we went into Iraq, we met some opposition, and it was mostly military opposition. It wasn't a lot of civilian opposition in the beginning. And maybe, I mean, even now, right? We weren't having to deal with a whole lot of armed civilians. Most people were, it was conventional military forces. That's very different here. I mean, imagine that we were going to put a plan together to invade Ukraine as the United States. I think we would need more than what we had to invade Iraq. I think that probably everyone would agree that kind of makes sense because you're going into a country of proud people that want to be left alone, and none of them would want our help in anything if we were to be invading them and they weren't under threat from another country. So I think that Russia somehow they've blundered this thing. They've miscalculated this thing, and whether they can right themselves or not, I don't know. Yeah. Ukraine's similar in Texas and landmass, the same thing as Germany, right? I mean, so those, I'm going to tell you that's a big country for over there. All you have to do is look at a country of Europe. Ukraine is going to be a rather large country, not compared to Russia. Russia's a much bigger country, but compared to Germany, Poland, Hungary, Romania, countries like that.
Going back to OIF-1, like I can think of a specific scenario where I was in where our AAVs were going down this road, and it was just our AAVs. Like we didn't have the armor mixed in with us because we just actually conducted an amphibious operation across the river. And we're going down this road, and I hear from one of the trackers yell out, BMPs in the tree line. So the ramp drops, we get out, we get online, and we assault this tree line. Well, we get to the tree line, and what happened was there was like T-55, T-62s, BMPs, like a whole tank platoon like in this tree line oriented on the road that we were coming down on in a column. And they had just fled because there was like a pot of burning rice or something that I remember seeing. And essentially there was only like a guy or two that stayed and, fired AKs at us. But I think about that scenario, had they stayed and fought, man, how many AAVs we would have lost, before we could get our dismounts out and start, putting some small rockets into those tree lines. And it would have been brutal. And that's exactly what's happening in Ukraine. You don't have mass tank platoons and their crews like saying, fuck this, it ain't worth it taking off. No, those guys are standing their ground. And we literally had a Cobra right on top of us overhead flying patterns. And they obviously did not see this Iraqi tank platoon in this tree line. Otherwise, they would have put some rockets into it. They didn't see it. So all this, we see this all the time. We've had some conversations about modern warfare, thermals and drones and all this other shit. And I've seen guys comment that camouflage is obsolete because of thermals. And guys, what are you seeing in this peer-on-peer fight in Ukraine? I mean, you would have thought it was something out of the 1980s almost. It's infantry against tanks, against trucks and artillery and helicopters and jets and man-pads, anti-tank guided missiles. Yeah, there's some drones in there, but, I guarantee you the Ukrainians are using those drones very, very reserved because they don't want to lose them, right? They get too close and they get blasted right out of the sky by anti-aircraft. So
yeah, that's another thing that's making this a big infantry fight is give credit where credit's due. Russian anti-air works. Look at the history of it from the SA-2 in Vietnam, the SA-3, the SA-8 in the Arab-Israeli wars. Hell, a stealth fighter was brought down by a 30-year-old SA-3. Russian anti-air works. So that's probably one thing keeping both sides' air forces from being maximized is simply the fact that, both sides have good goalkeepers.
I think it also goes to show that when you've got near peer on peer, you've got air dominance is important, and neither side seems to have it. The Ukrainians certainly don't have it, but the Russians don't have it either. And maybe that's one of the keys to this stalemate that we're seeing there and the lack of progress that Russia is making. Without air superiority, it's really dangerous to start moving your ground crews and large masses of ground crews around.
Yeah, that's another thing in talking near peer or peer-to-peer combat. And there's a historical thing that proves this kind of out, and that's in the Falklands War, where the British went down with excellent pilots, but the Argentines had damn good pilots, or at least very brave ones, and better aircraft in many respects. Neither side ever established an air superiority. The British could occasionally get it for small periods of time, but they never had the ability to just deny the entire airspace to the Argentines right up until the war ended. And we kind of see the same thing going on in Ukraine right now. Apparently, there are times the Ukrainian Air Force can amass enough in a place to have some type of an effect, because clearly earlier in the war, they got some air-to-air kills. But that 40-mile-long convoy shows the Russians have enough air defense going on, probably between top cover and their missile systems, that the Ukrainian Air Force can't get in there to do anything because, my God, could there be a more tempting target?
Hey, Les, on that, remember the British lost some ships and ships took damage during that engagement.
Every ship in the British task force took damage.
Yeah. I mean, they literally had attack aircraft hitting their ships. And we talked about this with the China live stream. But when was the last time the U.S. Navy was engaged in that manner? Can you imagine if the Ukrainians had the Harpoon missiles that they were asking for?
They'd be fucking up
being sent to the bottom of the sea. It would be a whole new dynamic in this battle.
I think something that's kind of been alluded to in what you guys are talking about is the motivation to fight can be a force multiplier, and I think we're seeing that here with Ukraine. I think one of the questions in there is why haven't the Ukrainians started using IEDs? Well, they don't have to resort to terrorism yet. There's no need to. They're still in the fight. They're still very much in the fight. So there's really no need to resort to terrorism yet, especially when they're trying to get in the UN. I think Russia's kind of provoking them a little bit, maybe piss off the UN when they start resorting to terrorism, but it hasn't come to that. They're still very much in the fight. So
yeah, and right now terrorism wouldn't give them an advantage because by not placing IEDs, it kind of gives the intention that they intend to take their territory back. And the last thing you want to do is demining what you've just taken.
Yeah, IEDs are great when you've got an occupying force in an area, like say a city. But when you're talking about those convoys, as Brent had said, those convoys aren't just sitting there with guys sitting in the back of the trucks doing nothing. They've obviously got air defense. We've all seen the memes with the A-10 Warthogs, they're getting all riled up to go. Yeah, nah, they're not going after those convoys. Those convoys, if they're sitting there, they've got air defenses multi-level, just like Les said. And they've got ground defenses too. Otherwise, guys would just step out of the trees and they would RPG them all day long. They're certainly not going to get close enough to place IEDs. So that's why you're not seeing IEDs. Like Chad said, there's just not a reason for them yet.
Yeah, and I imagine that the commander of that convoy has a security screen punched out a couple 100 meters each side at a minimum. And here's the thing to remind people too: as awesome as Javelin is, awesome as NLAW is, they're line of sight weapons. So a simple thing as a tree can protect a truck.
Yeah, and I don't know
if
anybody realizes, like in Ukraine, you've got roads and you might have some trees along those roads, but you may have fields that go forever. You may have fields go beyond line of sight. You know, there are vast open areas there. And so to try to move in on something like that, I think that would be a very challenging proposition. And to try to get out of it once you fired off those rockets would be even more challenging.
Exactly. And to comment on the terrain there, Bruce, I'm sure we've all seen that video of that Mi-24 getting taken out with the Stinger. He was at treetop height. I mean, you know, he gets hit with a Stinger, and 3 seconds later, he is crumpled metal on the ground.
Yeah, by the time he got a warning beep, he was eating dirt. He didn't have a chance. You didn't even see that helicopter try to correct. There just wasn't enough time. And why are they flying so low? Because they can't fly high.
Yep.
Yeah, so that just shows you the power of the infantrymen, right? The lone infantryman has the capability of taking out both an aircraft and an armored vehicle. He's just a grunt.
That's right. I don't know what that helicopter cost, but I guarantee you it was 1,000 times more than what that infantryman with that rocket cost.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm glad you brought up that convoy. I want to kind of turn into something else here for a second. I think we all agree that Russia's suffering from logistics failure, and as we know, but they also are reportedly suffering from decreased morale. I can't speak to the logistics failures, but other factors may be draining morale. In fact, I postulate that sexual frustration might be to blame for the lack of morale, and the solution is not prostitution. According to the International Federation of Robotics, though Russia does not have a foothold in the market for industrial robot development, it is rapidly gaining ground in the booming service robot sector. Therefore, I propose that this is where the implementation of sex robots at the platoon level may increase morale for Russian troops. It may also provide a distraction, allowing Ukraine to make advancements on the enemy. It's a win-win situation.
Chad, I lift my drink to you. You have brought a tear to my eye, and you have made Doc very proud.
Well, like I was telling Les earlier, you know, when the Army fails to, show up, you send in the Marines, we'll take care of business.
Absolutely.
And with that, guys, thanks so much for joining our stream tonight.
It leaves us speechless.
That is hard to follow.
All right, so let's get back on this here. So where do we stand? Because if you go on YouTube and you look up, any type of tactical training, anything, whether that's military or civilian, like everybody and their mother studying room clearing and mount techniques and shooting behind cars and all this other stuff, and how to reload the quickest, right? Like how many videos are on there about digging fighting holes? Because none of that shit's going to make any difference if you don't know how to dig a freaking regulation fighting position to take cover in from enemy artillery, or enemy rocket strikes, enemy HIMARS landing all around you. There's just so many aspects to fighting against a peer threat that so many people have just overlooked. Even our armor. Look at our body armor. So it's been this happy balance, right? You think about what we were wearing when we went into Iraq and Afghanistan initially, and by the time we left that, we got dudes with high cut Kevlars and plate carriers and stuff. Well, I mean, there was a reason why going into Iraq and Afghanistan, like our Kevlars were shaped the way they were, right? They provided not only protection to your head, but protection to your ears. Okay. And then our Flax, the interceptor at the time, provided, full torso fragmentation protection against fragmentation, right? Explosives, grenades, artillery, mortar, some degree of protections. Well, if you're just wearing a plate carrier, you got a front and back plate. And maybe side plates, that's not going to protect your whole torso. But at the same time, we also saw too much armor in Iraq when they freaking issued us that god awful outer tactical vest that made you into like a freaking armored turtle. But it's just food for thought there.
It's a great point, Brent. I know I was just reading up on German helmets. And the Germans in World War I talked to a bunch of doctors and realized that about 30% of the head injuries were from small bits of shrapnel that a helmet could have saved the person's life. And they were serious head injuries, right? So they decided, well, let's design a helmet to protect the head. And they did. And they tested it and went through all the peacetime testing. Everything was great. Send these helmets out to the troops. The troops immediately don't like them. Why? They can't hear well. So what happens? They get a helmet. They start getting helmets with the ears cut out. 100 years later, we're doing the same thing in our military, right? In peacetime, our helmets are getting tested, and the scientists are going, this is the best helmet that you can have. This is going to protect you from everything. And as soon as they get out in the field, soldiers and Marines are complaining, I can't hear anything with this over my ear. Sure wish that was cut out. And you start seeing the high-speed guys get helmets that are cut out over their ears. There you go, Brent. Point is, things in combat amongst the troops are different from guys back home in peacetime. And for those of you that's got that $3,000 AR I keep talking about in your closet, do you also have an E-tool in there? Do you got a canteen? Because these are things that you may need that may be more important than your split times on your reloads. We all like to get out on the range and show off how fast we can reload that AR. We graphite our magazines so they fly out extra fast, and we practice the Chris Costa, the speed wrist action so we can knock that magazine out the side. Guarantee you, start looking up combat footage of these guys in Ukraine on either side, they ain't doing that shit. They're in a hole somewhere trying to keep from getting blown apart. And that's the reality of combat.
Yeah, that is hard to argue with, Bruce. I mean, just the basics of building a good fighting position cannot be denied. And it's not an easy thing to do. I mean, at one Shepherd, we get to stack some sticks and put a poncho up and say we've made a bunker due to our compressed time need. I mean, you build a good bunker that can survive shrapnel from a 155, you're at it for days on end. And, you have big machines helping you do it. I remember when we defended Al Jabeil Airfield during Desert Shield, where all we had to do was all we had time to do was dig in. It was months we worked on our positions. We kind of never stopped. We were always doing something to make them better, more formidable, whatever, because you're never done with it. And it just takes forever. At the end of one day, you do not have a fighting position that does much more than protect you from a little bit of shrapnel at just the right angle.
What you got, Chad?
I want to kind of move this conversation kind of closer to the peer-to-peer topic, peer-near-peer topic. The United States, where do we stand in the world? Who's our peers? Who's our near peers? We haven't fought a near-peer war since, I would argue, Korea, since we were fighting the Chinese hordes that were coming over the mountains. Definitely World War II, that's obvious. But we haven't really been involved in any of that. And for the past 20 years or so, 2 decades, we've been involved in counterinsurgency. Israel learned this lesson the hard way when they focused solely on coin. In the 2006 Lebanon-Israeli war, when the terrorists basically came over the hill with tanks, mechanized forces, artillery, stuff like that, they were completely overwhelmed. They eventually succeeded, but they were caught completely by surprise. And I wonder if we're not, headed that direction as well. I know China is our big threat right now. I've read a little bit on the PLA. They've come a long stride since the Vietnam, since they invaded Vietnam in 1979. They've made some serious strides. Now they haven't really been combat tested. They have no veterans in their ranks, and that's kind of an advantage that we have. But technologically, they're kind of on par with us. So, I'd like to hear your guys' thoughts on that.
Well, speaking navally, I think we have the edge. So anybody out close to us is only a near peer. And close to us would basically only be the Chinese and the Russians. And I base that on type of ships they have and numbers. I mean, the Royal Navy is very well equipped ship-wise. They're very capable, and they have no numbers. I guarantee you we have more ships in routine maintenance every day than they have in their entire Navy. The Chinese right now are about to surpass us in numbers of ships. I don't think they're on our level capability-wise per ship, But then that means when we take a loss, we actually take a bigger loss than they did because our asset will be that much harder to replace. Another asset where they do actually have an advantage over us is they have a reserve fleet. We don't have that anymore. The last carriers that were in the reserve fleet have just been sent to the scrappers. The frigates and destroyers that were in the reserve fleet that haven't been turned into targets at SINKEXs yet are so far out of date that they're technologically incompatible with the modern fleet. So our fleet has no depth to it, and it's at its smallest numbers basically since the end of the Second World War. So at that point, near peer navally, it's just China and the Russians are a distant third place to the Chinese and us.
Yeah, I absolutely concur with that assessment. And if anything, this whole Ukraine deal has kind of brought the Russians down a step. And honestly, I don't think it's for lack of capabilities. Although there are some things that have surprised me very much so. I saw a report where like the Russians weren't moving at night because they just most of their guys did not have night vision capabilities. I mean, come on. As early as 2004, like when we went in 03, not everybody had NVGs for sure. I didn't, in my machine gun team of 3, only one guy had a pair of 7 Bravos. But when I went back in 04, everybody had NVGs. So this is like something we have done back in 2004, right? Most of the Russian rifles I'm seeing don't even have PECs on them. Their version, they have their own version of a PEC. Where is it? They don't have it. So it's like seeing all this go down in Ukraine, like my outlook of the Russians' capabilities has definitely taken a notch down for sure. Does that mean they're not a threat? No, it doesn't mean that at all. I don't think the Russians have that experience in logistics in warfighting that we have had over the last 2 decades fighting the global war on terrorism. Now that absolutely translates to the Chicoms as well, because the Chicoms, as we've discussed multiple times when talking about them, their last big hoo-yah was against the Vietnamese, and they pretty much got their ass handed to them. So we have that going for us. If and when they do move on Taiwan, they will make some mistakes, just like the Russians have made some mistakes going into Ukraine.
Yeah. The one capability that we have that makes us outstanding far and above our other competitors is our logistical capabilities. Nobody has logistics like we have it. Nobody has the resources dedicated to it like we do it. Even in our drawdown state right now, our logistical capabilities are far superior to everybody else. And just look at their orders of battle. No one has as much of their Air Force dedicated to transport and logistics as ours is. I mean, they just don't. It's just nobody's even close. Same with the Navy. The Navy doesn't have a lot of cargo ships and a lot of amphibs like it used to, but it knows how to use them. It has the doctrine in place for when they do get those ships, they know what to do with them. And our Gator freighters do exercise regularly. Yes, as Marines, we're relearning floats essentially, but we're not starting from zero like the Chinese are. Yes, they've built amphibious ships that look just like ours. They're not using them the same way, and I doubt they could employ them the same way we do. I don't think they've developed that doctrinal and corporate knowledge that's necessary. Because our logistics came about from basically Reforger during the 50s and 60s about we're going to have to move massive forces from the United States to Europe to stop those Russian hordes coming through. So our logistics capability from the Second World War on has never atrophied, much to our advantage.
Sorry, let me just comment on this real quick because I've seen this similar type of comment over and over and over in the stream. Guys saying like, "Oh, they sent in their third." The Russians talking about the Russians. They sent in their third stringer guys, or guys. They're doing this on purpose. Come on, guys. Really. They tried to take the main airports right off the back with a helo-borne assault. They did not expect this to go this way. No, they did not send in deliberately their weak guys to take a bunch of casualties to give the appearance that they're weak and then they're going to come in with a strong right fist. And no way. Give me a break. You kidding me? Putin does not want this. He does not want hundreds, if not thousands, we don't know, of body bags of Russian troops coming home to his country.
I'm with you, Brent. I don't know what these guys are talking about. I mean, They sort of remind me of like the Iraqi news guy where the missiles are blowing up behind him and he's like, "Oh, everything's fine, man. Like, what are you guys talking about? We shot at a couple of planes a few days ago, but everything's okay." Look, I get that some of you guys, you're either off your rocker or you're toting the line, but it just doesn't make sense. Like from someone who I don't really have a dog in the hunt here, right? But I'm sitting here looking at this and I'm going, Putin is not sitting up in the Kremlin going, yes, this is going exactly how I wanted it to go. No, he's not doing that, y'all. That's not the way it is. This is, to Les's point, there he is. Okay, this is
that Bob.
Yeah, that's Baghdad Bob.
This is now Moscow Bob, and he's saying everything is okay, guys. Everything's going according to plan. This is exactly what we wanted to happen. These are all this is a lot of it's a logistical nightmare. Like Les is our logistics guy. Why would you not issue NVGs to every tank crew there and every guy in a truck? And you simply say, these are training NVGs. Do not take them out of your pouch under any situation or any circumstance unless you're ordered to by a superior. They would have clipped that onto their gear and got in the truck and just went down the road like every good soldier does. There's no reason not to give them those things unless you just don't have your logistics together. There's no reason for those trucks to have barely made it all across the border in Ukraine, and now they're all stuck waiting on fuel. What? How does that happen? That doesn't make any sense. Like, you have to fuel your army. You have to feed your army. You have to make sure that they have the supplies that they need, the ammunition. Just none of this to me, guys, makes sense. Now, you're welcome to try to convince me that this is Moscow Bob's great plan and it's all just some giant spring trap for Ukraine. I just have a feeling that there are a lot of generals in Moscow right now that are not only concerned for their lives, but for their families' lives.
Yeah, the Russian general that just got killed. I'm sure that's part of the plan too.
Yeah. Take it down to the most basic level. Yes, we're Marines and we love making fun of Army pogues because why not? But name a nation on this earth where the paratroopers aren't the elite, the best of the best. And yet the paratroopers attacked the airport there and were pushed off by the Ukrainians. Now, I don't know what Ukrainian unit did it. Maybe it was other paratroopers or maybe it was their elite guys. But the fact is, paratroopers went into battle and got forced off their objective. Look at any war in the 20th century. How often does that happen? Market Garden. Name another one.
You see the video of the Russian EPW that said he was a Spetsnaz and he was captured?
No, I hadn't seen that one yet.
Well, I think it's looking bad on the home front too. I'm reading an article right now that says nearly 5,000 anti-war protesters were arrested in Russia this weekend. Obviously, the home front's not looking.
Yeah, I bet he definitely was not expecting that.
Yeah, I saw a comment very early on in the stream where someone had said that one side is winning the what was they said? One side is winning the militaristic war, and one side is winning the propaganda war. I'm not seeing that. I think that the same side is winning militarily and propaganda. The fact that Russia hasn't taken more than they already have, their plan couldn't have been to be where they are right now. And the fact that they haven't accomplished that, that's not a good look for them. We're all talking about that. We're all saying we're disappointed in their performance. And secondly, on the propaganda level, whether what you believe in the news is 100% true or not, there's two countries basically listening to Russia winning this and Russia spin, and that's Russia and that's Belarus. Every other country in the world, listen, every other country in the world is supporting Ukraine on this thing, right or wrong. You've got CNN and MSNBC praising the arming of civilians with AK-47s in Ukraine. Let me tell you something. When that happens, you've lost the propaganda war. That's for sure.
Point well said, Bruce.
Chad, I see you got a map pulled up. speak to
Yeah,
that?
I was just gonna make the point. I mean, they really haven't come that far. This is a Business Insider has up to date maps. They keep up to date as far as how far the Russian forces are advancing. So I would call this has been updated today, and this is kind of as far as they've come within a week. They obviously haven't taken any major serious objectives. They have Chernobyl, but that's a shithole anyway. So I'm not really sure, how people can say that Russia's winning militarily when, I mean, this is as far as they've come.
And Chad, let me just say this, because I know you know this, but maybe the viewers don't. That area down south, that's Crimea, and that area to the east, which is everything west of Donbass, they really already had. That was already pro-Russian separatist control areas.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah, that's why I can't figure out. Look where Mariupol is. That was right on the edge of the Donetsk area that was under control already by the separatist forces. How could that not have fallen? Yet today I was watching some stuff with some people there holding out still. The city has not fallen. It makes no sense whatsoever. And that city sits astride a major transportation artery. So they need to take that city.
Well, I know that we haven't seen them, and we see fewer and fewer of them, but we had some Russian viewers at one time, a few streams back. Maybe if they could reach out and get Putin to come on Brent's live stream next week, he can clear all this up for him. We'll do a round table. We'll ask him some questions. We'll figure out what his plan is. We'll let him tell us that everything's going exactly as he wanted it to go. And then the whole world will understand what he had in mind for the Ukraine.
Well, we got to remember, the Ukrainians have been receiving training, not just weapons, but training from, NATO nations. But they've been training for this type of fight, this peer fight. I mean, fighting against a overwhelming force with tanks, with aircraft, with UAV, all this assets. I mean, I guarantee you those guys were digging fighting positions. And plus they were actually fighting against a Russian separatist the whole time as well. So I mean, we're seeing the results from their training.
Go ahead, Bruce.
I'll just go real quick. Like we've said this before, but we can't emphasize how important training is, whether it's on an individual level or on a military level. And there's no better training than combat itself. Guys that have been there, have experienced it, have tested themselves, and that they know that they can function when under that kind of stress. There's nothing better than that. And that's what Ukraine has in its advantage. So many of those guys have already been fighting for years. And most of these Russians that we see coming in, these are not Russian separatists that have a lot of combat experience that they simply rolled into units and had come in from Belarus. These are fresh troops, young faces, most which have never had any combat experience at all. And it's pretty shocking to them. And we're seeing the difference between having someone with combat experience, determination, and drive, and a sense of nationalism to protect your country versus somebody that thought it was a training operation and didn't really want to be there and maybe just joined the military for the college benefits.
Yeah, and on that note, because I saw somebody comment in there that combat is a horrible training. Yeah, well, yeah, but I guarantee you nobody's just picked up and say, all right, you're going to the front and figure it out. No, it's not that. It's no, you're training in the rear. You're learning the basics. Now you're going to the front. Now you get combat experience. Okay. A great example of that in history is American involvement in Vietnam during a Recondo school. They would do the whole Recondo school, and then their final exam was they actually went out on a live recon mission in a hot LAO. So tell me that wasn't like the most superb training school ever. So,
and that's a sink or swim. Also, your life's on the line. You either put your training to use and you excel, or maybe you come home in a body bag.
Yeah, I think one of the things you can talk about of a near peer fight is training matters. To dial the clock back a little and use the Falklands example again, one of the things the British had the advantage is they sent their A team. They sent the commandos, they sent the paras, the best of the best in their forces. and they went up against Argentine conscripts. Armament-wise, the sides were armed almost the same. Same type of rifles, same type of ships, same type of helicopters. Matter of fact, the Argentines actually had more and better night vision, and it didn't give them any advantage over the British, who attacked at night every time. That's so it shows that training probably matters a whole lot more than the weapon, unless your weapon is just giving you a major advantage that the other side just doesn't have.
So going back to the peer on peer threat or near peer, one thing I'm very cognizant about is the Russians' capability of jamming drones. We've seen this. The Ukrainians have seen this on the the eastern side fighting against separatists. They've seen their drones, their Turkish drones, get jammed. I read an article about it. But we U.S. have also seen this in Syria. If you didn't realize, U.S. aircraft and drones were getting jacked with by the Russians over there. So they have this capability. Okay. Well, what happens when drones get jammed? Well, now we're back to just basic, regular, conventional warfare, right? Hooking and jabbing, rifles, grenades, rockets. So again, everybody likes to prop up all this high speed technology and think that there's going to be these, drone swarms come in and fighting in the future is not even going to be possible above ground. Guys, technology works both ways. The second one weapon is invented, there's always a counter invented to counter that new weapon system. Okay. And then you're back to beating each other with freaking rocks and sticks.
Yeah. And finish off that analogy that I was just using about the Falklands, even though the Argentines had a slight technical advantage in night vision, the British training was able to overcome that. And yet most of those battles ended at the point of a bayonet.
Well, I think
all these guys here will agree because everyone here has had the opportunity to use night vision and many other things that technology affords us. That stuff is nice, but it doesn't win the battle. It doesn't command the battlefield. For every cool piece of technology you've got, whether it's some type of laser device or nods or a red dot optic on your weapon or whatever the case may be, it doesn't overcome training and experience many of the times. Just because you don't have it doesn't mean you can't win the fight.
Well, let's talk about this. So obviously we got the Russian-Ukraine conflict going on right now. Pretty crazy, pretty eye-opening. I don't think anybody in this room actually expected this to unfold. I think most of us kind of were on the same page and thought, the Russians were just going to strengthen what they already had. But this has just opened a whole Pandora's box here. Who knows? This particular conflict could snowball into a possible NATO-Russian conflict. And if that happens, well, I don't think the Chinese are going to sit idly by when the U.S. is engulfed in this big war in Europe. Well, they're going to move on Taiwan. Well, once that happens, well, guess what? We got World War III going on because now all your South China Sea and all the little allied nations in the Pacific are going to jump in on that fight. And we got conflicts going all over the world. So this could very easily snowball into World War III. And then again, guys, we're talking about United States' two most geopolitical threats, Russia and China. China arguably more so than Russia. And those are absolutely possibly peer, but definitely near peer threats.
I think the biggest obstacle we're going to face is our political leadership. I'm not sure that our political leadership is up to the task. And that's what worries me the most. Joe Biden, I think he's played a fair game, not the best game, but a fair game here with this. He's been strong with the economic sanctions. But again, that's not a very strong response. But as far as that goes, it was he did follow through with it, which I'm kind of surprised. But that's what worries me the most is our political leadership.
I agree with you. And Zelensky's given a great example of good leadership. Talk about, creating that memorable moment. I don't need a ride. I need ammo. You won't see my back, you'll see my face. The fact that he gives his press conferences wearing an OD t-shirt. I mean, this guy understands leadership. I mean, have you ever seen a world leader of a wartime nation give a rally via TV in a square of another country? Yet we just saw that they had a huge big screen up in Prague, and the square was filled with people cheering him on. I mean, this guy has leadership, and it just shows how bad our guy is. And give credit where credit's due. Putin took stock of Biden and nailed it. He knew exactly what he was going to go up against. And that's probably why he was willing to do more than just try to reinforce Luhansk and Donetsk, and decided to go for the whole enchilada, because he figures that even if it goes bad, he can still get it. That he took the measure of Joe Biden and figured no matter what he does, Joe ain't doing shit. I think the one thing he didn't account for politically was the Europeans growing a spine. I mean, none of us probably thought that was going to happen either. So
Nope.
Got to give him that one.
I tell you, this Zelensky guy, I mean, I think he's a bit of a sleazeball. Okay.
Well, he's a politician, of course he is.
He's a politician. If you look at some of the things that has happened in that country prior to all of this, it's sleazy. It's not something that we in the U.S. would necessarily be proud of. But Les, you're absolutely right. This guy is brilliant right now. I don't know if they resurrected Goebbels as his minister of propaganda or what, but he is the best dressed. He is pandering to every broken, bleeding heart there is in the world. He's saying all of the right things. He looks like the kind of leader that every country wants to have. He has played it perfectly. And so good for him. I don't know if he's just a great actor or if this is his moment to shine. I hope he survives this whole thing. I do, because I think that he's been great for the country of Ukraine. And I think he's been great for NATO. He's got NATO shaking in their boots because they don't want to go help the guy, but they feel like they have to. And I think that if you were to poll the American people right now, they would get behind us getting involved deeper in Ukraine when our government doesn't want to, because of this guy and because of how appealing he is to the camera, and because of the way the news media is just lapping him up. They don't care about anything he did in his past. He's the cool guy. He's unshaven. He's got his OD green combat shirt, and he's walking around in squares with the people. How could you not love this guy, even if it's all fabricated? So I'm going to tell you that Zelensky, I mean, guys, say what you want to say, but most of you in chat are more educated than the average person out there watching the news. And the average person out there watching the news are the people that write our diplomatic doctrine, and there are people that decide who wins the next election and how they win the next election. And I think he's been great for the country. So, hey, I see you screaming in all caps. The U.S. does not need to get involved. You don't have to tell me. You've got to get over to Yahoo News, and you've got to tell all the soccer moms, because they're not hearing that on what they're reading.
So, I mean, here's the thing. We are openly helping Ukraine, right? There might not be American boots on the ground, but by God, there are weapons.
We're advertising. We're sending in javelins.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question. Like, we're openly telling them, no, Poland, we're going to give you some old freaking F-16 so that you can give your old MiG-29s to the Ukrainians. Poland, a NATO ally. I'm all for it. I'm just saying, we are openly advertising this. I mean, it's like, imagine if the Russians or the Syrians were openly advertising that, hey, we're going to be sending a bunch of weapons to you, Al-Qaeda in Iraq, to help your war against the Americans in Iraq.
I thought that was a brilliant move, Brent, though. And for those that I hear some people talking about, like the military industrial complex, just gritting their teeth and rubbing their hands that they can't wait to make this. Think about this deal. You call up Poland and you say, hey, you got those old rusty planes? And they're like, yeah. Like, will they still fly? Probably. Listen, here's the deal. You send those to Ukraine, we'll build a bunch of new F-16s for you here in the United States, and we'll trade you out for them. Who wouldn't love that deal, right? I mean, how brilliant is that? It's win-win-win for everybody. And then you sell it on the idea of, well, that's what the Ukrainian pilots know how to fly. I love this stuff, man. I can't get enough of it. I feel like Nicolas Cage in that war movie, right, Chad? You know what I'm talking about?
Lord of
Art
War.
of War. Art of War, dude. It's like real life. You know, I love it. I love this stuff.
Hey, this is a great point, though. The Russians said they weren't going to invade, and they did. So thank you for pointing that out. I mean, it's obvious. They lied. They straight up lied. There was no. This isn't a. Oh, you know, we're doing the Russians wrong here. No, screw you. They said they were having big military exercise on the border, and then next thing you know, they're launching freaking a full blown offensive into the country of Ukraine. Like,
Brent,
okay.
You got viewers here, Brent, from Russia that just weeks ago told me to my face in writing that this was just a training exercise. Guys, I know you're not in chat tonight, but you're listening. I'm disappointed in you. You hurt my feelings.
Let me guess, Bruce, you've lost 2, possibly 3 seconds of sleep over this.
Is that your safe space, Bruce, right there in that chair?
No more. Hey, Russian free zone right here, guys. All right. I canceled you.
Almost wish they were here tonight. Almost.
I can see Zelensky tonight. Yeah, Putin and Bruce canceled your ass too. Well, back in Moscow, Putin's going, well, fuck.
So yeah, anyways, back to what I was saying. So it's like we're openly advocating that we're sending all these weapons, not just us, but all the NATO countries. And the Russians have already came out and said, hey, if you guys interfere with this war, there's going to be severe consequences. Oh, and by the way, I'm putting all my nukes on fucking high alert, you know. And then here we are saying, okay, well, you know, we're not going to step foot in there, but guess what? We're sending all these advanced anti-armor weapons and anti-aircraft weapons there. And oh, by the way, we're giving them a bunch of MiG-29s. And so, and I'm sure the CIA is somewhere in Ukraine right now doing their thing.
No doubt.
I'd be rather disappointed if they weren't.
So, all right. Well, we're at an hour now. We got another topic. Kick around. This one kind of seems like it's dying down a little bit.
Well, just to finish up on the near peer thing, right now we have an advantage, but we're at the point we need to take severe action to keep that advantage. Like I said, the fleet is not deep. It's got the lowest numbers it's had in a very long time, and the reserve fleet just doesn't exist anymore. So every time if the fight kicks off soon, every loss we take is irreplaceable. We don't have shipyards aplenty like we used to, and to build new ships will take time. A lost aircraft carrier is going to be a 7-8 year replacement. Even a destroyer would take a year. Even if we did the World War II thing where you build it on the West Coast, sail it to Hawaii on the shakedown cruise, and send it into combat, even that's going to take a year to replace any hull we lose. Aircraft were probably a little bit better because it's probably fairly easy to take an F-16 sitting out in the desert, throw some upgrades on it, put the pilot in it, and get it back into the sky. It's probably not as effective, but it's a good 80% solution. The Army itself is probably in dire straits. They probably have equipment sitting around, but if it needs to start training masses of soldiers quickly, that's even going to take months. So while we do have capability right now, we don't have strategic depth. And I think that might be one area the Russians and the Chinese might be beginning to outpace us on.
So you bring up a good point, or at least trigger a point in my head. Can we fight? Can we fight right now in the state of our U.S. military? Can we fight on two fronts? So what if this Ukraine thing does snowball, and it does lead to a NATO conflict with the Russians, and then the Chinese take advantage of that and do move on Taiwan, bringing our allies in the Pacific into that front? Can we fight that war? Because think World War II, priority was given in Europe, right, against the Nazis in Germany. And then, you know, the Japanese, even though they were the ones that attacked us, were the second priority. But where do you put your priority there? You got two nuclear armed nations, arguably, you know, near peer, if not peer. And we can't fight two wars on two fronts. against these arguably potentially peer threats. So where do we put our emphasis there?
I would say we have one advantage that's unspoken of. Our Asian allies have been doing what our European allies have not been doing, and they've been building and modernizing. The South Koreans and the Japanese are damn near at our level with their ships and their capabilities. They're adding capabilities. The Japanese are converting their helicopter destroyers into light aircraft carriers. The Koreans are getting ready to build a light aircraft carrier. They have amphibious ships equivalent to our SX class. So they've been building and expanding their fleets and building and expanding their air forces because they saw this coming. That's probably our saving grace. However, our other problem is our European allies haven't been doing crap. I mean, the Germans basically admitted that last week. And the only saving grace out of this whole Ukraine conflict is the German chancellor just pretty much announced a major 180 to German military policy, upping spending to 100 billion euros and stating that they're going to keep military spending up because they don't have a choice. And if you watch his speech in the German parliament, even the Green Party applauded him. So I think there's been a change of heart, but the Europeans are so far behind the curve, it's going to take a decade or two for them to get to the point where not only they're upgraded, but be able to expand. And a primary example I'll give right now, besides the German, is the British. They built 2 aircraft carriers and have enough planes to exactly fill up half of one.
Well, sounds like we need to send them some F-16s. I'm sure we can give them some kind of deal, and they can send their Sopwith camels or whatever they've got sitting around with Russia or Ukraine. But I'll tell you, I wondered this myself, Les. Could we even get involved? I'm not saying fighting a war on 2 fronts, but man, do we even have the fortitude to even get involved on a war on 2 fronts? And I kind of wonder. I keep asking myself, what's Putin doing? I don't see his end game here. Maybe he's just made a giant military blunder. But if this is going according to plan in some sort of way, what is he trying to accomplish here in Ukraine? I don't fully understand it. I talked to my buddy today who's got a wife from Belarus, and be honest with you, he said a whole lot, but he didn't really explain to me what they were trying to get either. I don't think anybody knows, including even the people that are there. Can we fight a war on 2 fronts? Maybe. And again, can we get all of these Asian countries to come together to oppose China? Look at me. Just a hit from the South, right? They all look the same to me. I'll be the first to admit it. But I also know that they're not all the same. A South Korean is not a Japanese, and a Japanese is not someone from Taiwan, and someone from Taiwan is not someone from Hong Kong. I get that they're different cultures, completely different peoples. Can we get them to come together and help us fight the Chinese on that front? I don't know, but I hope so.
I don't
think that's going to be enough. I mean, Les, this is your area of expertise. Talking about supply and logistics, I'm looking at a map of Taiwan right now, and it's just a couple miles comparatively off the coast of China. We got a long way to go for our supply trains and stuff like that there. Australia, we closed all our bases in the Philippines, which was right there. Japan, South Korea are pretty far off. You got North Korea to contend with. South Korea is probably going to be paranoid on 2 fronts as well because of North Korea. I don't think we can do it. I really don't. I don't know how we would even defend Taiwan. I don't even know what Taiwan's doing right now to prepare for an invasion. Are they being proactive like the Ukraine was after 2014? We don't know. At least I don't know. You guys may have more insight on that than I do.
No, I'm going to agree with you there, Chad. There's nothing in the news that I can find about what Taiwan is or is not doing. So they might be doing jack shit, or they might be doing everything under the sun. There's no indication. What there is an indication in the Pacific Theater is the Japanese are rearming massively, and their stuff's on our ability or their equipment's on our level, basically. Same with the South Koreans. The South Koreans have large forces, but so do the North Koreans. So how much can they split off to fight China? Japan, they're building their force up. The question is, how far can they project it? The Australians, nice to have them along. They don't have much. and they're far away. New Zealand's just as bad. Matter of fact, they have even less. They can just say, "Yay, go team." Um, our logistics will be paramount, and if we're going to focus on the Pacific, then this makes this the time of the Navy. In the 1950s, the Strategic Air Command alone was 50% of the defense budget because that's where we felt we had to put all our effort. Going forward against China, I say the Navy has to be 50% of the budget, and they have to get all the priority. Because if they're not there to secure the sea lines of transportation and have the hulls they need to get across the water, it's going to be a moot point no matter how well the Taiwanese fight.
That's a great point, Les. And if I remember correctly, I think we addressed this during our China live stream that our supply lines are going to be contested. Like we as Americans, U.S. military has not had to deal with that in recent years. Maybe going back to Korea, like Marines might not be able to be resupplied on these islands when they take them. And the Commandant of the Marine Corps actually gave a pretty good interview with that Naval Institute magazine that you always read, where he says like Marines need to learn how to, hunt and fish and forage for their own food because they might have to supply themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's becoming a lost art because in World War II, we were very good about protecting our supply lines in the Pacific and even in Europe. And we continued that up through the Cold War. Part of every Reforger and Team Spirit exercise was a convoy exercise, just getting over there. I do not know if they've done a convoy type exercise in the recent future. I haven't read anything about it. And I know we haven't done anything Reforger-esque at all since the end of the Cold War. Because, I mean, let's be honest, even in a training exercise, we move 150,000 troops. It would make the news.
So let's talk if this does evolve into a World War III scenario. Will it go nuclear? Because I saw a comment saying like if it does, nukes are going to get shot, and although it's very likely, um, I would think if it was contained to something like fighting over Ukraine or fighting over Taiwan, I think if it was contained to something like that, as long as there's not U.S. Marines landing on mainland China, I don't think it would devolve into a nuclear war, and I don't think Russia would do it because it's mutually assured destruction, right? So I think as long as those wars are fought over a third party control of an area and not necessarily them losing their country, kind of like the Falkland Islands War, right? I don't. There's a good possibility it won't devolve into a nuclear war, and it will be primarily conventional. But obviously, no, we don't want to see it go to that because we don't want to take that chance. But I think it's a very real possibility that it would be a fully conventional conflict, at least in the scenarios that are currently playing out.
And not just that, Brent, but people have to realize that it's not a binary question. It's not, do we keep it conventional or does Moscow send to New York and New York send nukes to Moscow? You've got small tactical nukes also. We have them. They have them that can be fired out of cannon and can be sent from smaller rockets that are designed almost like an artillery barrage would be to take out a small area of just a few miles, wipe it off the face of the planet through nuclear technology. But we're not talking about Hiroshima or Nagasaki, something much, much smaller. And I don't have an answer to your question. At what point do we decide, how far up do we ramp it up? How far up do we step it up? I don't know, but I know a guy that I bet does. This guy right here. Chad, I'm sure you've got a comment on
again.
I'm
I'm
concerned. Softball.
I'm concerned over our political leadership and their fortitude to engage in anything further than what we're already doing. If my boy DeSantis is in office, I'm not too worried about it. But right now, I'm very concerned. I don't think Joe Biden has the fortitude to take this any further than he has. We'll see.
100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100%. 100
I think what's interesting here is nobody's willing to put a nickel on it because we just don't know, do we?
No, I don't think the people with the button on either side know either. When you war game things, several years ago, I used to play a lot of games called the fleet games, and it was one based around each U.S. fleet, and nuclear weapons were an option. And they were tempting because, yeah, you can wipe out an entire U.S. battle group with a nuke. And if you were the Russian player, yeah, you would trade one of your submarines to launch a nuclear missile and take out a U.S. battle group. Fair trade, straight up. But how would we react to the USS Nimitz getting sunk in the middle of the Indian Ocean by a nuke? We lost a battle group. That'd be significant because if you take a carrier battle group, we just put 10,000 guys in the graveyard. We're not going to let that go unanswered. But will we just go nuke one of their battle groups, or will we nuke something of theirs somewhere else? Can we nuke something in a third-party country? It's a conundrum that, I'm sure our best and brightest have sculled this over since the nuclear age started, and they probably still don't have an answer yet.
Yeah, I could snowball real quick.
Yeah.
That's any country that's thinking about doing nuclear anything on anywhere must do that with the expectation that you're going to get one in return.
Yeah. And the other thing is, like, I've heard some stuff online where, like, if he gets desperate enough, Putin will nuke Ukraine. I can't see it. That's historically, from the time of the czars, the Ukraine has been the breadbasket of Russia. Why would you do that? That's like saying poisoning your own food. I just don't see it,
I agree with that, Les. That the whole idea of them, I think that's the problem that Russia's got in Ukraine right now is they're forced with the option of either turning the heat way up, bringing in a lot more heat, not even necessarily nuclear. It could be conventional. It doesn't matter. Man, they're being painted with such an ugly brush right now, just on what little they're doing. My buddy I was telling you about that's got the wife from Belarus, he was saying, they're not targeting civilians. They're being very technical about their artillery strikes, very technical about their rocket strikes, and they're trying to strike very special targets, and they're trying to get civilians out of there. Look, I'm not over there. That may be true, but that ain't the story that we're getting. That ain't the story that anybody's believing from Ukraine and anywhere west of Ukraine. No one's buying into that. That's not what's being told anywhere. No one's got any love lost for Russia right now. They look like the bad guys and the aggressors. So if Russia's idea is to try to minimize casualties, why in the world would they be using anything greater than conventional weapons and weapons that can pinpoint strike as much as their technology allows? I don't know. The story doesn't make sense to me. So I'm kind of left not sure, kind of left flustered. And I'm hoping that in the next couple of weeks or 3, we'll figure it all out and maybe it'll make sense to us, because I'm not getting it. But I don't see them escalating things in Ukraine in terms of force, and certainly not nuclear, working in their favor in any way whatsoever.
Well, and we got to remember something. So, we've been told that Russia has hypersonic missiles, and the Chinese are working on their hypersonics as well. And I've heard a lot about Russian technology leading up to this fight, and now I'm seeing most Russian troops don't even have freaking NVGs, stuff that we've had for 20 years. So where exactly do they stand? And also you got to remember is we have anti-nuclear capabilities, right? We are constantly testing, shooting ballistic missiles out of the sky with intercepting missiles and whatnot. Like, the U.S. government does not get out there and say, yep, this is where we're at with our defensive capabilities, and this is what we're working on. Like, there's, whatever we're aware of, they're probably a couple decades ahead of that in actual studying and technology and whatnot. Somebody?
We solved world hunger. Moving on.
No, you're absolutely right about that, Brent. We don't know all the capabilities for intercepting the nukes. But one thing we do know, we don't have Star Wars. And another thing, I'm always skeptical.
How do you know?
Well, Good point. But one of the things I'm skeptical about is when they tell me what the enemy has, because I remember as a young kid growing up, as Reagan became president, we were worried about the god awful Russian particle beam weapons. The Russians have particle beam weapons, and they can shoot down anything, and our missiles will be no good, and our planes won't fly. Anybody ever seen a particle beam weapon? Yeah, so when they say the Russians have a hypersonic missile, they might have one. I've been hearing about super cavitating torpedoes that go 200 knots for decades. As far as I know, one doesn't exist.
Wait, here's another thing to think about. So remember, this was like 6-7 months ago. There's footage of UFOs and stuff. F-18s were tracking these objects that were moving at hypersonic speeds and everything. Like that stuff is probably ours. Like the U.S. Navy pilots were reporting it every single day. Like they were seeing this stuff right off the coast of U.S. coast. It's like, okay, well, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to think like this stuff's getting tested right outside the United States off our coastal waters where U.S. Navy aircraft are. Like, you might want to put two and two together there. We're probably now whether aliens exist or not, and maybe that's a conversation for another live stream. We're probably very far advanced in our technological capabilities than people are aware of.
I don't doubt that. Go ahead, Chad.
It's not just that. You got to think about this in more than just militarily. We've got to talk about economically, politically, technologically. I've Anonymous hacked Russia. I mean, those aren't even government entities, and I think this is the first time Russia's on the defense when it comes to cyber warfare. Economically, we're flushing their economy down the toilet. Now, we arguably are flushing our economy down the toilet as well, but their economy is going to hurt way more than ours. So this is a multi-dimensional battlefield. So that's something else to think about as well.
Absolutely right, Chad. Now I've said this in all the streams. Russia's economy is probably their Achilles heel, and they don't want to get involved in some long, drawn-out war with anybody because wars are expensive. We know that better than anybody. I've been paying for them my whole life, and I know a lot of you in chat complain about that. So I'm gonna tell you, man, that that's not something that they want to get involved in. And you're right that this might cost us. I know that. Right now, Uncle Joe is pondering whether or not to cut off purchasing fuel from Russia. But I know what he's thinking. He's got people on one hand saying you can't do it because gas prices are going to go much higher and it's going to kill us in the elections because that's how he thinks. And he's right. But on the other hand, it's immoral to continue buying oil from a country that we have determined is going to be the enemy. So here's what it comes down to, though. I have no doubt we can absorb those costs. Maybe not politically. Maybe the parties change hands and the government changes parties. I think that's already in the cards. But we can afford to take on that. And I'm not so sure Russia can. Man, Russia's getting crushed, man. Their economy's getting crushed. Their oligarchs are getting crushed. Their businesses are being shut down. I mean, I see it. I'm getting stuff on Facebook from small guys. Little guys that just have little businesses, and they're like, I don't know how I'm going to be able to sell to you guys anymore. I've built an entire business around selling stuff to America, and now Facebook's been cut off. I can't even get on Facebook. I can't get on Instagram. Social media is being shut down. These are the actions of a desperate losing country, not one that's winning, guys. So whether you guys want to believe what the mainstream media or the media in the U.S. or Western countries are saying or not, and whether it's right or not, it doesn't matter. All that matters is that they're on the losing side of this, and it's more than just a militaristic war going on in Ukraine. This has the potential to really set Russia back. When you cut someone's finances, then their technology gets cut. There's just no way around it. Technology and advancing technology, building all those really cool Armada tanks and those hypersonic missiles, that costs a lot of money, guys.
Yeah, that's a great point, Bruce. And we've actually seen this game play before. When the Berlin Wall fell and the Soviet Union collapsed, and the 1990s was an economic literal free fall for them, that did more to take the Soviet Air Force and the Soviet Navy out of the game than anything that we ever did.
So I would raise this question then: where do we stand as far as peer near peer with China in these other aspects? Economic, political, cyber, technological, communications, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that, I mean, that's something else to think about as well.
Well, I was going to throw this little 2 cents in there. Like, think about this for a minute. U.S. government came out and said Russia's going to invade Ukraine. It's going to happen. And all of us, obviously we're very weary of our own government, because they lie to us all the time. We're like, shut up. Can't take anything they say, as gospel. And they did. So obviously we had our tentacles inside the inner workings of the Russian military to know that this was going to happen. We obviously have the same thing going with China. So, we might get heads up. We're getting our intelligence community, even though they screwed the pooch on 9/11, is obviously got some inside people there and are feeding us. So we have that going for us.
No, good point. And I'm sure we've infiltrated the Chinese, and I'm sure the Chinese have infiltrated us.
We got Democratic senators that are sleeping with them for God's sakes.
Exactly.
In their defense, they were hot.
You got a good point, Bruce. You got a good point.
I'm just saying, guys. There's two sides to every story.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you that one.
What was her name? Fook Me? Is that it? Or is it Fook You?
No, we're going to clash with the Chinese at some point. They're clearly getting ready for it, and you can see that with the expansion of their Navy. You can see the new fighters they have coming out in their Air Force. Although recently, when looking up the Chinese Air Force order of battle, while they have some modern aircraft, they don't have them in the quantities that we have. They've been working on that J-20 for a while, yet already we have more F-35s than they have J-20s. We definitely seem to have the ability to produce more aircraft faster than they do. So that's an advantage to us. So that does make me wonder. They're experimenting with their aircraft carriers, and they're learning quickly. You saw they bought that Russian hull. Took them 20 years to kit it out. They're basically admitting it's not even a fleet carrier. It's a training thing. Then they built another one. They built that quicker. Then they built like their first regular carrier, not with catapults or anything like that, but they kind of figured it out. They got something on par with the Indians. And now under construction, they have their Type 004, which is a full catapult capable carrier. That'll probably be about 2/3 the size of one of ours. But they're doing that fairly quickly. So they're learning quick. Now, once they learn how to get it right, the question is, can they mass produce it?
Yeah, I mean, another thing we got to think of is like when you see pictures of the average, Chi-Com grunt, like he doesn't even have freaking body armor on other than a Kevlar helmet. Nope. And it's like that's where they're at in their individual loadout. So take that piece right there, and now think about the Russian invasion that just took place, where they don't even have NVGs for the most part. It's like the Chi-Coms are probably not as well equipped as we'd like to think.
Yeah, but how far does well-equipped get you?
Yeah.
Quantity does have a quality all its own, and they've proven in all their wars, they don't mind throwing bodies at the problem.
I agree, but you got a big body of water you got to cross too, though.
That is true, and they haven't figured out how to get across 186 kilometers of water yet. I've got to think, though, sometime they'll figure it out.
Well, I think it goes back to, we've been involved in conflict for the past 2 decades. The last time the PLA has been combat tested was 1979. They fought in border skirmishes. They've probably done some military operations where the Uyghurs are out in the western part of China, but other than that, they haven't really been combat tested. Now we have. The problem with what we have been tested with is counterinsurgency, which is a whole different ballgame than what we'd expect when we're going to go into. If we're talking about defending Taiwan, that's probably going to be a conventional war. And Brent, you could probably speak to this more than anybody. You know, what are we doing to prepare for conventional war?
Oh, sorry, I was trying to find pictures of PLA troops. So I obviously I can't speak to other branches of the U.S. military. My understanding is the Army is also preparing for a Pacific fight as well, to some extent. The Marine Corps, in particular, has for several years now been gearing up for the Chinese fight. We have not been gearing up for a European fight. I can tell you that much. Now we still have the capabilities of doing that, but the Marine Corps' mentality is like when it comes to tanks and stuff like that, we're going to get that stuff from the Army attached to us or be in direct support of us. But the Marine Corps has looked at this and said, okay, in order for us to be successful in the Chinese fight, we need to restructure our current Marine Corps. We can no longer fund some of the old legacy programs. We need to get rid of them so that we can take that money that was being used for legacy programs like these certain airframes and certain tactical vehicles and reallocate those funds, because we don't, the Marine Corps doesn't say, hey, we want this and we get it, right? They get a pot of money and they have to figure out how to divvy it up. So, by divesting of, widget A, you can invest that money into widget B to further prepare yourself for that fight. And what's happening is we're seeing a complete restructure of the Marine Rifle Squad, and essentially just how the Marine units are composed, with these littoral concepts. You're seeing super grunts now. We used to have certain Marine MOSs. So 0311, you're a rifleman, 0331 machine gunner, 41 mortarman, 51 assaultman, 52 tow gunner. Used to be became a subject matter expert in that particular weapon system. And that would go into fielding a Marine infantry unit, right? But now what we're getting are 03 super grunts. So these guys spend longer in the School of Infantry. They learn all the weapon systems. Now, what does that make you? It makes you the jack of all trades, master of none, right? You're not going to be as specialized as the old way of doing things was, but they're going to know a regular infantryman can now pick up a javelin and, have that capability. He knows that weapon system. A regular infantryman can now pick up an M240, medium machine gun and know that weapon system. A 50 cal, a Mark 19, a 60 millimeter mortar. He's got that capability. And the reason they're doing that is because when they restructure these Marine rifle squads and platoons, for that matter, they can say, hey, this one platoon is going to occupy this, little island here. And then from there, they can help enable other operations, because this little platoon is capable of doing a whole lot more than the old rifle platoon concept was capable of doing. So, getting rid of tanks has freed up a bunch of space in ships. We're heavily investing in weapon systems and, all the way down to the individual grunt. New rifles. Everybody's got M27 IARs with new variable optics. All this stuff's happening over time, right? So it's like, as a reserve Marine, I'm not going to see the latest and greatest, but it will eventually catch up. But those are just a few things that I've named off that, the Marine Corps has done that has helped revamp gearing up for this Chinese fight.
For those of you that want to see an example of a super grunt, please check out Brent0331's YouTube channel. He has lots of videos demonstrating exactly what that is. And be sure to share and like.
Killing me. I keep seeing the Emma comments. Emma will save us all. She's operating the SAMs. If you guys don't know what that's a reference to, it's the Army, U.S. Army's recruiting commercial. It was a cartoon where it starts off, with her explaining that she's got two mommies. How that has anything to do with U.S. Army recruiting is beyond me.
There must be a lot of them out there that they're trying to recruit for whatever reason. But yeah, if you want to see a poor example of our military history, check out that commercial.
Hey, look, the Russians may have nukes and they may have a lot of planes and submarines, but we got diversity training. They can't beat us there.
All right, what else we got, Phyllis? Otherwise, we're going to wrap this up. We're about 20 mics out from 2 hours.
Well, it'll be interesting to see what the Europeans do. Like I mentioned earlier, the Germans have basically done a hard about on their defense policy, and be interesting to see if the rest of Europe follows along. It'll also be very interesting to see if NATO does allow Finland and Sweden to come in. That'll be very significant. One of the things that happens with both those armed forces is that they're small. The Finns are small by their economy. They only have so much. They have a lot of reservists, a lot of ground forces. They're actually treaty limited to only having 60 combat aircraft. So there's no way around that. The Swedes, on the other hand, have just, since the Cold War ended, have just gotten smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. For them to ramp back up is going to be a long road. It'd be interesting to see if they're willing to pay that price. The Germans, too. I mean, they have really withered on the vine. As I mentioned earlier, the British, they have a good new equipment. They don't have enough of it. And the French, they're probably about the one European ally that's sitting in a fairly decent defense posture. It's be interesting to see what all the rest of the European nations do.
Well, it costs money, and it's not something that they're going to be able to do in the next year. I imagine this Ukraine situation is going to be history a year from now, regardless of how it ends, one way or the other. And if that's the case, do they stick to it, or do they have that short-term memory where all of a sudden the next time someone new in their political organization is elected, do they drop all this expensive defense spending that they had planned and go on to some other type of social training?
Isn't
it will be interesting.
Isn't it interesting to see that some of these smaller NATO countries are sending like some of these higher sophisticated weapon systems like javelins? like I was surprised to see Lithuania sending javelins to Ukraine and Stinger missiles and all this other stuff. Stuff that you kind of think that the U.S. exclusively has, and like the UK exclusively has, but no, that's part of being NATO, man. You're going to have these weapon systems.
Did I not explain this to you last time, Brent? The not American weapons that are going to Ukraine. All right. You think I know someone's coming. I'm giving China all of our secrets, but don't call me a conspiracy theorist, but it could be possible that those were made here, sent over there on a U.S. ship, accidentally got mixed up somewhere and ended up in Ukraine with Finnish markings on them. It's not beyond the realm of possibility.
There it is.
That's your Finnish drone. Okay. Those are made.
No. See, you're off case here. The Finns only sent one guy to Ukraine, the son of Simo Haya.
It was, no kidding. We need that guy, don't we? That guy could have wrapped up this Russian problem already.
I'll tell you what, if the Ukrainians are able to pull this off, they might take the high seat. Like you always talk about like the Finnish war. Now the Finns, handed it to the Russians until they were essentially end up negotiating, right? But obviously they handed it to the Russians pretty hard. But I think the Ukrainians, man, if they can pull this off, it's going to be the new, they're going to be the new Finland, right? It's like you don't fuck with Ukraine after this.
Oh yeah, and they're going to be demanding things of the EU and NATO, and they're going to get it. Because you don't want to be seeing the guy that didn't back them up. So, yeah, I would imagine, let's hypothetically say 6 months, this whole conflict's over. Yeah, 6 months, you'll have Ukrainian F-16. 6 months, there'll be Ukrainian M1s. Abso-freaking-lutely. The Ukrainian army will be huge, massive, well-trained, and incredibly well-equipped. Because nobody will want to be the one that said no.
Yeah, we'll find somebody for Ukraine to trade all those old Russian MiGs to, and we'll get them new shiny F-16s.
Yeah.
I'm going to disagree with this comment.
I disagree too.
You think about they're not peer-to-peer, right? At best, Ukraine is a near-peer threat to the Russians. There's a big disparity between technology and capabilities and manpower. Ukraine's in the fight of their life. right? How are they going to pull this off without doing that? So if they regulate it only to their military, they've already lost. So I absolutely on board with this. I think this is the Second Amendment makes the United States almost uninvadable because of that. And the only thing they did wrong is they should have get those damn rifles out sooner.
Yep. There's lots of examples of desperation, and I'll name one that you all will know: Stalingrad.
Yeah, but the problem with Stalingrad is there's not going to be some big giant Ukrainian army enveloping the Russians coming from another direction, to win that fight. So.
No, there's not. But for every great advance and it being desperate and arming all of your people with everything you've got, sometimes you can slow that momentum. And once you've slowed that momentum and you begin to turn that momentum around, it can snowball the other way just as fast as it came at you.
Yeah, a better example might be Leningrad. That city tied up all kinds of German assets by just simply existing.
Moscow as well. Moscow was never attacked, but there's photos of Germans holding the lines with Moscow in the background. They weren't able to get there.
Yeah, I think another indicator of desperation would be the use of terrorism, which they haven't resorted to yet. They're far from it. Preparing your civilians, to me, that's more of a post-occupation move than it is, hey, let's get civilians in the fight right now. They're not really doing that. They have these, combat brigades that are forming up like militias and stuff like that. But I mean, we haven't really seen any of those in action yet, at least on Western media. And again, the desperate turn to terrorism. I mean, that's what happened in Iraq and Afghanistan. So.
Yeah. And, Ukraine might actually have those reserves of people, because I read an article today that said they're actually turning foreign volunteers away because they've had so many Ukrainians outside the Ukraine come back that they're running out of rifles and equipment, which, that's a kind of a nice problem to have.
Well, I saw, we were talking about this earlier. Jaeger is volunteering to go over there, right? And he posted a website to, if you were interested in volunteering to go. And like, I went to the website just because I want to see it. And it's like they're actively recruiting guys with military and combat experience and or law enforcement and stuff. And like, you have to apply. So it's like it isn't as desperate as one might think. Like, they're actually saying, hey, no, we want dudes that are already trained. We're not just taking anybody to go over there.
Yeah, I actually looked on the official Ukrainian website the other day, because they've actually been able to get it stable. So they've overcome the Russian hacking. And if you want to volunteer to go, not only do you have to have prior military experience, you have to have actual combat experience. They just don't want the average pogue. And if you go as a law enforcement officer, I've seen it's like almost 5 years experience you have to have. They are not just taking anybody with a DD-214. They are being highly selective.
Wow. I bet there'd be a lot more volunteers if they were able to pay them. So, because I mean, there's a lot of guys that I think
don't know, because we do have an historical precedent here, and that was the Rhodesian conflict. And a lot of Australians and Americans ended up there. A lot of British soldiers ended up there too, but they did not make up a significant portion of the Rhodesian armed forces by any stretch of the imagination. Matter of fact, you find them more grouped in like the SAS and the Sulla Scouts, but you don't find them littering the units of the RLI, for example.
Were they paid?
Yeah, they joined the Rhodesian army. They got paid what everybody else got paid.
But I mean, here's the difference though. If you go to Ukraine right now, my understanding is you're not getting paid. Like there's nothing. So it's like a guy that is here in the States that maybe has to put all his crap in storage while he goes over to Ukraine to fight. Like, he needs a source of income to sustain that back in the rear. Or maybe he's got something back here in the rear that, requires some sort of monthly payment or something. It's kind of like going on deployment. Like, you got to kind of have somebody in the rear to hold it down for you so that you can go over there and fight. And my understanding is going over there to Ukraine, like you're not getting paid. You're just volunteering to go fight.
Yeah. Here, posit this one for a second. What do we think of the chance of there being a modern Flying Tigers?
I personally wouldn't rule it out 6 months down the road. I wouldn't rule it out.
It would be an interesting concept. And it will also be interesting if there's a backer that comes up and backs the Blackwaters, armor groups, and Constellases of the world to put together a fighting force to go in. I can see somebody bankrolling that.
It probably wouldn't cost as much as some people think. And, there may be some rich baron out there that's involved in the oil industry or in some type of industry that has some real skin in this game that may be willing to bankroll something like that. We've seen it before. What you have, executive outcomes in Africa, right?
Yeah. The difference there was EO was going up against tribal armies and stuff, so half a dozen EO guys could get a lot done. Great guys to work with, though.
So we're winding down. We only got 10 minutes left. So it's kind of fair game. If somebody's got a good question, you start posting those questions and maybe we'll answer in the last 10 mics. But I will say that questions are going by very quickly. So
I'm glad you can keep up with it. I lost track.
I'm trying. I'm trying. One thing I want to note about this whole Russian-Ukrainian deal is, for the first week of this, we heard a lot about like, oh, Putin is mentally unstable, like he's not the same Putin and all this other stuff. And it cracks me up because I'm sitting there and like, Putin's given like hour-long plus speeches over Ukrainian Russian history from his perspective. And, our president can't even say one sentence without stumbling over his words, right? Did you guys see the State of the Union where he said the Iranians?
I think it's very important, and I've done this before, but for us to point out to chat, I'll speak for myself, but you guys can nod if you agree. We understand as Americans, we are absolute hypocrites. We understand that we've attacked other countries and we've bombed women and children and we have a retarded president and all of those things. We got it. But that doesn't mean that we can't also stand on the side of another country or have opinions about things going on in other countries or other aggressors or other leaders. We can have it all because we're Americans. And that's just the way it is here.
Fuck yeah.
America.
All right, anybody see some good comments here?
Man, Bruce nailed that. I mean, how do you follow that?
One guy says he thinks Russia will hold the eastern part of Ukraine. I think, my personal opinion, that's how it's all going to end. I think this is going to be Russia's going to be attrited so much from trying to take these major cities in Ukraine that eventually they're not going to pull out without some sort of win. So my prediction is they're going to kind of solidify definitely the stuff they already have, and then maybe take something of economic interest, and then they're going to go firm, and then they're going to.
I think they're certainly going to leave with at least the Donbass region. There's no doubt about that. I don't think Ukraine wants to keep separatists in their borders. They'd be stupid too. And, you can tell just by the way the Russians moved in with the 4 fronts they moved in, they're pinching off the Donbass region. They're trying to surround it. I think they'll at least leave with that. Putin's got to leave with something. Otherwise, so he can say, look, I did this, I accomplished this. I could be your president for the next 10 years.
Yeah, that is basically how the Winter War ended. The Soviets went to the Finns and said, we want the Karelian Isthmus, we want the port of Passamo, some other areas. Finns went, fuck no. And basically 3 months later and 1 million dead Russians, the Russians had what they wanted. So the Finns went, okay, peace. And the Russians went, yeah, great deal. And that's probably how this will end if I have to predict at this point.
I'm not going to disagree with that. I really honestly don't know. Nothing would surprise me at this point. I don't see Russia getting completely pushed out of Ukraine with nothing to show for, and Ukraine having to continually deal with the areas that are east of Donbass and Crimea as well. I have a feeling that Russia will probably retain those areas and will redraw some borders. But I think that quite possibly Ukraine as a country may come out stronger from this in the end.
I think that's pretty much a given. It could be simply he might call it quits when he has his overland corridor to Crimea, because Crimea is his warm water port, but he has no way to get to it easily right now. If he gets his overland route, he might be able to go back home and say, I got what I needed out of this deal. Don't know if that keeps him in power or not, depending on how much economic damage has been when he gets to that point.
He's going to have a hard few years ahead of him, I think.
I got to tell you guys, when you see random like messages pop up, the comments move so fast that when I click on a comment to highlight it, sometimes the next comment below it pops up. And so I end up highlighting the wrong comments. Sometimes the other night I had some like sex ad pop up and get highlighted, but this is the one I wanted to pop up. So it says, Yanks, you are clueless with what's going on for real. I remember back when we were talking about will Russia invade, we had some Russian, people in here talking about, we don't know shit about Eastern Europe. Ukrainians are Russians. Well, apparently the Ukrainians don't agree. So
just a training exercise.
So, yeah. So, you guys that are just running your mouth, shut your mouth. The whole world is seeing what's going on right now. So, all right. So we got a few minutes left. So let's just start going around the horn, guys, and wrapping this up. If you got a respective YouTube channel or anything, you got final comments on this topic or Russia, Ukraine, by all means, let's go. Chad, you take it.
All right, great chat, gents. Again, when it comes to peer, near peer, I think there's a few things to consider. Obviously, there are different aspects other than just the military war. You have economic warfare, you have political warfare, cyber warfare, communications, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So when assessing, peer versus near peer, these are other things to consider. It also matters, I think, who's on defense and who's on offense. Obviously, being on the offense, you're going to strain your resources, your logistics, your manpower. You're going to strain that a lot more. And I think that's kind of what we're seeing with Ukraine. But I'll pass it on to someone else.
Well, I think this is a subject we're going to have a lot more live streams about. If I'm going to take the safe bet. Clearly, Russia has not performed on the level that I think literally everybody expected them to. Ukraine has clearly performed on a level far above what everybody expected them to. As things develop, it looks like the Russians are going to bombard the cities a la Grozny to take them that way. And it looks like the Ukraine is going to get reinforcements not only in the form of volunteers to plus up their manpower numbers, but it looks like they're going to get a lot of equipment from the Western nations as well. I think that points to this fight's going to drag out for a while. And I don't think it ends without, as we said earlier, Vlad marching home without something in his some kind of feather in his cap. And that being said, I don't think the Ukrainians are going to let him have that feather very easily. I don't think they're going to get so tired of the fight where they sit there and say, all right, you got the Donbass, screw it. You can have it as long as you leave us alone. I don't think that's going to happen either. As far as my YouTube channel goes, I'll continue posting videos every week. I got one coming up on a flashbang simulator coming out this Tuesday, and I hope you all check it out.
We definitely want to check that out, Les. That sounds cool. And I actually agree with everything that Chad and Les said. I can't really add much to that. I know some of you guys have been wondering where Doc is tonight. He's been testing out the Mark 1 Mod O sex robot Asian model. There you go. He had a slight technical difficulty, short trip to the doctor. He's fine. Okay. Thoughts and prayers with him. He's going to be okay. Just a small little skin graft. It'll all heal up. He'll probably be back for the next one, and you guys can ask him all about it. But just keep him in your mind tonight, okay? You guys, we all miss Doc. We want him back safe and sound.
Beat me to it, Bruce. I was going to share Doc's medical condition as well. So, hey, I appreciate everybody jumping on tonight. This has been a lively stream. We've had about around 300 folks in here throughout the entirety of the 2-hour period. If you guys haven't noticed, I've done a lot of live streams lately. This has just been one of those gifts, I guess. Started live streaming after Afghanistan started falling, and this has kind of been an unforeseen end product from all that. So I've enjoyed it. I enjoy doing this stuff. I never thought I'd be the kind of guy that does this stuff, but I'm fortunate to have these kind of guys around that enjoy having these open conversations with y'all. And it's really great to interact with all the audience and answer some of your questions, even if they're, Russian bots that are constantly jabbing at us. But I wouldn't mind being invaded myself by some of the Russian troops that I've seen on the interwebs. And, if this individual wants to parachute into my backyard, I'm all about it. So with that being said, guys, we're going to wrap this up. This is, like I said, been a nice discussion on fighting peer and near peer enemies. And I think the U.S. military, as well as obviously other NATO allies and some of our allied nations in the Pacific area, need to start gearing up, because the next fight, again, is going to be against a peer or near peer threat. 100%. No question in my mind. We're gearing up for it. We're getting ready for it. And if you don't know how to dig a goddamn fighting position, you better learn, because I can tell you right now, digging a fighting position, a proper regulation fighting position, is a lot more important than split times. There's no question in my mind, and that has been a lost art. So with that said, guys, we're going to end it. Appreciate everybody tuning in. Have a good night.